All right, I believe we are live. Hey everyone on the interwebs, my name is Dave Revnek and I'm with a number of others. I'll show them to you and we're going to have a discussion about this book, Confronting Christianity, 12 Hard Questions for the World's Largest Religion. This is by Dr. Rebecca Mclaughlin. And let me introduce some of my friends who join us for this live discussion. So push the button here. So with me is Renee, my wife Carrie, and Eli, and Joni. It's good to have you all with us today. So what I'd like to do is give a brief overview of the book, introduce the author, and we can share some of our impressions, initial impressions of just how the author approaches this issue. And then we'll go through a number of chapters, hitting some highlights on how she addresses some of these serious questions. And then we'll end by talking about what can we learn from this author and how to have faith conversations with our non-believing friends. And I think there's a lot that we can glean from her. I think she did an excellent job. So without further ado, we'll get started. So a couple things about this author is, so it's written by Rebecca Mclaughlin. I read a couple articles by her on the Gospel Coalition. Thought they were really interesting. And when I saw that she had this book and a couple other friends recommend it, I thought, hey, let's give it a shot and let's put it on our monthly book reading club. So a couple things that I just really appreciate about her is that she has a PhD in Renaissance literature from Cambridge University and a theology degree. And she spent a lot of her time working with Veritas Forum. And Veritas Forum does things like seminars and workshops, helping university professors, thinkers, students talk about faith, especially in the academic world. So this is someone who not only loves Jesus, is a firm believer, but also has real relationships with other believers in academia, but also is evidently having conversations with skeptical, non-believing friends. Some of them very smart, very respectable in their fields. And basically, my overall impression is I really love this book. Overall, I loved how it was very personal. It was sincere, and she really treated and took on some of these really challenging questions, which are most commonly asked today. The questions that people wrestled with 30, 50 years ago is different than today, and a lot of the questions today are ethical in nature. And it's really refreshing to see someone deal with these questions, a lot of them ethical, in a way that's very different than kind of the debate format. So Christian apologetics, that's defending the faith. That's what, apologetics means. Sometimes tends to have this debate argument kind of approach where it's about you're sharing these high level arguments, you're getting into philosophy, you're getting into facts and science, and it seems to be very focused on trying to win the argument and win the crowd of people there, not really to win the heart of the person you're actually talking to. And so her approach seems very sincere. She shares her own struggles, her own story, her own journey. She's willing to admit where there's blemishes, on, the Christian record and throughout Christian history. But she's also very sincere in seeking to persuade people, especially, non-believing skeptic friends, that Christianity is the best, worldview. It's the best philosophical assumptions that you could have in this world. And so, yeah, that's kind of my impression of it. I got the physical copy of the book here. I also got it online, and I also got the audio version of it so I can listen to it. So I thought it was really good on a lot of levels. With that, would anyone like to share some of their impressions with the book, just overall with the author and just her tone and style and approach? How about Renee? Do you have any thoughts?
Yes, I really found it interesting how she was able to take science-driven ideas and show the Christian link to them. That even though they were trying to, some of these authors or some of these scholars were trying to go deep and prove against Christianity, where they're in reality proved just the opposite and found themselves being Christian in the long run when they were doing it. To me, that was an amazing, and it's really a good way for us to approach it today, with the knowledge that that even those we think are lost can still be won to Christ.
Eli, any impressions from the book overall?
Yeah, I like how she kind of first just comes out of the gate and starts off with addressing the issue of kind of like we were talking about before the meeting, the issue of what's true and absolute truth and kind of that concept, and then differentiating between Christianity and all other religions, because there's this concept that, you know, in the end it all goes to the same place. But basically her arguing that the entire Bible, Old Testament and New Testament, rests on one major historical claim, and that we have a lot of evidence pointing to that claim, like the 500 witnesses of the independent sightings of Jesus, and we have other writings like by Josephus and Tacitus that point to the accuracy of this, and her differentiating between that and other religions, and then also grounding that in the love for others, and it not resorting to an argument about what's true and untrue, but more so trying to win the hearts and minds of other people.
Carrie. Unmute.
What do you want to know?
What was your just general impression of the author and her approach?
I mean, kind of the strength and weaknesses of this book are that she draws on the opinion of really smart Christians. It's neat to hear how there are Christians in the academic world in positions of influence over the culture that really have a strong faith and can speak about it clearly. I would argue that might be one of the weaknesses too, that some of the arguments simply point to, hey, this person believes this, so good job. So it's the good and the bad.
Joni, do you have any impressions overall?
No, I thought it was just a different view that she had, bringing in history and science and psychology that most people just focus on the heart, and which is obviously what I would tend to do as well. So it kind of just opened different avenues of discussion.
Awesome. Yeah, she definitely put in a lot of endnotes in there, like a research paper. You know, it's like, oh, this is it has a very personal touch. It's very winsome, but also you got the footnotes of this could be a dissertation. So, you know, definitely she writes as someone who is in that world, and it seems evident to me that she has deep friendships with people who are not followers of Jesus and who are getting hung up. And, even in the book, biographically, she shares some of those discussions and some of those relationships that she has. So I just really appreciate it. I really hope that, that there's more apologists like her, kind of approaching this the way that she does. I think definitely hitting in with the challenge of ethics is the real big question that, the culture is asking more and more. We're asking less and less questions about, like, can miracles happen, or, all these sorts of things. But it really is the question of, what is right, what is true, what is just, what is fair, what is equality. And so I really hope that, we have a new generation of people who are able to speak into that with the intellectual rigor, that she does. So, all right, let's get into some of the chapters. And so chapter 1 is the question, aren't we better off with religion? And she goes after the question, it's posed by Karl Marx and several others, that, religion is the opiate of the people, that religion is a poison. And she just goes after I think first, to open it up to conversation about Christianity, eventually, you got to address the religion versus non-religion. And just the assumption that people have that, religion is just a fairy tale. It doesn't really help you. It makes you feel better, but it really has no good for society. Science helps society, research helps society, truth helps society, and religion is not true. So therefore, it's not actually good for you. And it's really interesting. She approaches this with just a lot of research in sociology and psychology, and showing that the data is pretty overwhelming, showing that people who are engaged in religion, not just merely beliefs, but just practicing religion in general, create this cultural lift in society. It betters society in general, but it's also good for the individual. It's good for the family, and it's good for life. So she does admit at the end of the chapter, like, this does not prove Christianity. But she does say, I'll just quote in page 28, she says, "But while it is impossible to explore all the relevant data, there is compelling evidence that many individual and social goods arise from religious participation, and that Christianity in particular is well aligned with the findings of modern psychology." And she goes on and says, "No matter what we believe, we must all confront Christianity. It's the most widespread belief system in the world, with the most far-reaching intellectual footprint, and a wealth of counterintuitive wisdom concerning how humans should thrive. So let's begin." So she pretty much just opens it up. It's like, you just can't discount religion, because it's counterintuitive. Like, Christianity itself is counterintuitive. She goes into that, and it seems to actually make a difference. So there might be something more to it, which kind of deserves our investigation. Does anyone else have any kind of thoughts or quotes from the first chapter that they'd like to share? Go ahead and just unmute and speak up.
I was struck by the religion, miracle, drug section on page 21, how she goes about showing, even in something as secular as USA Today, religion may be a miracle drug, and that it really does, without taking anything, without any cost to you, monetary cost to you, it really does improve your life. It improves your health. It improves your well-being in so many ways. And I think that's looked past so many times in our culture. Like, well, what good does religion do you? Well, it does me good by having a family that I can go to. It does me good by feeling better about my circumstance and so on. And I just really liked that idea and thought that that is something that we need to be discussing with others on a regular basis, and that we just don't. We sweep it under the rug.
Anyone else from the first chapter?
I kind of felt like she was also discussing how relationships, with all the people that she knew, and how that affected people. It's amazing. Bill recently at work, things have changed for him, and he was put in a situation he thought he was going to be very uncomfortable with, and he's already developing a relationship with a person that he thought, because of things that were in her life, that they would be a combination of things that so they wouldn't be able to work well together. And he has found that as he's developed his relationship with her, things have gone remarkably well. Of course, we're both praying, as was Bill's previous boss. And I think relationships are important because you don't even have to speak about the Lord. Eventually it comes out and they know. I had a gentleman I have known for 30 years come to me the other day who has, when I have tried to talk to him about my faith, has kind of poo-pooed me all along. Now he's hit a crisis, and who did he speak to but me? And so even relationships that you don't think are working towards faith, it's planting seeds whether you realize it or not. And so I think that's important.
All right. I'm going to invite Heather into this as well. So we'll add one more to the crew. Oh, it's Eli. You got another one. All right. Eli had to switch devices, so that's fine.
Yeah, I'm getting ready to head to class, so I'm switching to my phone here.
Okay, no worries. That's fine. All right. We will keep going. So let's just look a little bit at the next chapter. So chapter 2 is the question is, doesn't Christianity crush diversity? So, this chapter we're taking, the author kind of takes us to the first church in the Bible and kind of just shows from scripture itself that Christianity was a multi-ethnic movement from its inception, and that throughout history, Christianity's expansion, and even today, that Christianity is just the most radically and culturally diverse religious movement in the world. And a lot of this, she's pushing against this assumption that Christianity is a Western white religion. And she basically says at no point was Christianity ever that. That really what you're seeing it with the assumption that, Christianity is a Western religion is really just the prominence of Western culture and the influence of Western culture today, with things like the advent of science, with things like, all the progress, that you could say that Western society has given to the world. Just because of that prominence, that kind of makes the Western Christian voice a little bit louder, but that doesn't mean that Christianity isn't or hasn't been diverse. In fact, it's the most diverse religion in the world. So she kind of points out, and I thought this is really powerful, that look, really, when you look at it, the most non-diverse group is really the atheist community, that they're primarily white, they're primarily male, and to leverage the argument that religion, and specifically the Christianity, kills diversity is just putting your head in the sand. It's just not true. So I thought that was really powerful. One quote from page 35 is, she says this: ironically, our habit of equating Christianity with Western culture is itself an act of Western bias. The last book of the Bible paints a picture of the end of time, when a great multitude that no one could number from every nation, from all tribes and all peoples and languages will worship Jesus. That's Revelation 7:9. This was a multicultural vision of Christianity from the beginning. For all the wrong turns made by Western Christians in the last 2,000 years, when we look at the church growth globally today, it is not crazy to think that this vision could ultimately be realized. So if you care about diversity, don't dismiss Christianity. It is the most diverse, multi-ethnic, and multicultural movement in all of history. Anyone else have any kind of just thoughts or impressions from that chapter that they want to share?
I just really like how she really spoke to each culture or each religion specifically. She didn't just do the generalization. She tried to track it so that you could say, yes, actually, one of the first converts was the Ethiopian, and just the way that she was able to track it back to each culture, I felt like it gave us something to be able to use with anybody we talk to, not just sometimes these books do a very broad spectrum, yes, this applies to everybody, but doesn't get down to the nitty-gritty. So I like that part about it.
Anyone else? Thoughts on, does Christianity crush diversity?
I thought this was a really important chapter because sometimes in the US, Christianity gets equated with either being from the Western world or being American even, and we think of it as ours. And this chapter reminds us it's a global movement, and it's not even primarily with us. It is around the world. And one thing that I want to look at further is her claim that that there's hundreds of thousands of Christians in Iran, which I thought was interesting. I have a brother-in-law that's Iranian, and that the Iranian church is the fastest growing Christian movement in the world. Thought that was cool. And just the idea that if China is taking over the world, that it might not be as horrible as we thought, because Christianity in China is also growing really quickly. So I thought those are all interesting takeaways, but just the reminder that we don't own Christianity is good.
Joni, do you have any thoughts? Or Eli, if you're still there, you might be gone. Yeah, that is pretty crazy to think that in 5 years, there'll be more Christians in China than there are in the United States. So praise God for that. All right, let's go on. We'll do a couple more chapters and then we'll get to kind of the argument portion of it. So chapter 3, how can you say there's only one faith? And I thought it was really interesting because she talks about the elephant parable from India, which I have actually heard this parable before in India. And it's a classic, some people don't really aren't aware of it, but it's kind of a classic parable used for kind of religious pluralism. And so, the parable just goes like this. There's a king that wanted to show all of his subjects that no one true religion has a corner on truth, that there's some truth in all religion. So he calls 4 blind men in a pit, and there's an elephant in there, and they feel the elephant, and he asks the blind men, well, tell me what an elephant is, because they've never seen an elephant before. They don't know what an elephant is, right? And so one feels the leg, and it's like, oh, an elephant's like a tree. The other one feels the trunk, is like, oh, an elephant's like a snake. Another one feels the size, like, no, an elephant's like a wall. And the king, right, makes the point to his subjects that, look, this is like all religions, that no religion has a corner on truth, and that every religion is true and every religion is wrong at the same time. And then she just points out, which is where the parable actually breaks down completely, is that this is only true if you claim to see the elephant. That it's actually intellectually dishonest to say that all religions are relative, because that claim in itself is a religious claim. It's claiming to see the whole elephant. And there's actually a level of intellectual dishonesty with that sort of relativity. And then she basically breaks it down in the rest of the chapter that, so for example, with respect, you hear people say, oh, you should respect other people's beliefs. And she says, well, no, you should actually respect the person. And if you really respect and love the person, then that means that if you really respect them, then there needs to be a willingness to want to convince them if their beliefs are wrong. And she does the same with truth, and then conversion and ethics and monotheism. And she kind of ends it with Jesus, that Jesus claims to be the truth and the life. And so that's basically her approach in chapter 3. I thought it was also very important because it just deals with that really big assumption in the Western world that, you know, truth is relative, all religions are true, and just kind of says like, well, actually that statement is a very intellectually dishonest statement to make. And if you really do care about people, if you really do respect others, then you need to be willing to convince and be convinced. Any thoughts on that chapter?
I think something that's really interesting about that analogy in particular is that that analogy assumes that they're all describing different parts of the elephant, but with religion, they're all describing one phenomenon. For example, the creation of the world, or who is the savior. They're making claims on the same topic. So them trying to say that they're in that analogy, that they're actually talking about different things. And there's something that we talked about in an ethics class that I had taken, basically saying, I think it's like the Law of Non-Contradiction. So 2 things that are talking about the same thing and are contradictory cannot be true at the same time. So if I'm saying that the sky is blue, the sky can't also be red. So in this analogy, religions are making claims on the same topic. So kind of like you were saying, it's a very disingenuous argument.
Yeah, it's really, it seems to be separating, instead of giving dignity to people, you're giving dignity to ideas. And you're separating it from people, and you're treating ideas as something that needs to be cherished and respected and cannot be confronted. And you're damaging people if you attack or call into question or confront their ideas, which is just kind of nonsense, right? So it's interesting. I think culturally, we've done this thing where we're moving towards, well, you know, the ideas, the values that people have are sacred, and they're separating that from the actual people. Where actually, if people are respectable in the image of God, then that means that, you know, if you really love them, you're going to go after, in love, you know, helping people with thinking through and with truth and with things like that. So I thought it was, yeah, like you said, Eli, very important to deal with.
I think one thing that's really important from this chapter that is so important for our culture is the idea that disagreement does not equal disrespect. Because I think we forget that sometimes, as, I mean, not us particularly, but so many times people assume disrespect just because you disagree. And I liked her breast cancer analogy, that if a woman is saying, like, I don't have risk for breast cancer, they're a middle-aged woman, I'm not going to get a mammogram, it would be loving to persuade them to get a mammogram because it's life and death. So like we should take our own beliefs seriously enough and other people's souls seriously enough to try to persuade them.
It's good. That's good. All right. Let's do, yeah.
I was just gonna touch base on the I had briefly talked about it earlier on the post-truth being added to the Oxford English Dictionary, and that the reality of that is now being presented as truth to our kids. You know, it's one of those books that we think, well, it's there, it must be the truth. It really is something. And so it's scary as a parent and a grandparent to think that this is being presented as the truth, a true statement. So even though the post-truth is relating or demonstrating circumstances in which objective facts are less influential in shaping public opinion than appeals to emotions and personal beliefs, it's still like, so it's okay to have your truth. It's okay to have, it doesn't have to be an objective truth. And I just think that's a very slippery slope we're walking on there.
And I would say, and I think the author deals with this well, that, you know, that definition does reveal that there is a shift, that we're no longer focused on just merely truth, but it is also just a broadening out of, there's also ethics and values and these things that are hard to, apart from a Christian worldview and, you know, surrender to Jesus and Jesus's ethics, there is a need to not just talk about what's true, but also talk about what's right and what's fair. And so part of that post-truth, you know, definition is an attempt to broaden out. We don't just, you know, it's like, you know, scientists can figure out how to clone a dinosaur, but scientists can't tell you if we should clone dinosaurs, right? And so it's more than just what is true is right, or what is possible is right, but there needs to be more. And the problem with the post-truth definition is that, of course, you know, apart from a theology and a Christian worldview, you're not given any ethic to live by. And as a result, you do have to navigate this relativism where you really can't get anywhere. And I don't know where she used this analogy, but I thought it was really good. That culture, it's kind of like the Wile E. Coyote instance. And so she talks about, you know, the Wile E. Coyote in the Roadrunner cartoons, right? He's running off the cliff, and he's still running even though there's no solid ground underneath him, right? And he's still running, and there comes a point where he looks down and he realizes there's no firm ground underneath him, and then the reality sets in and he plummets to the ground. And that as a culture, that post-truth kind of moment in our culture is we as a culture, as you know, especially Western society in general, is running off that cliff, and we're running and running and running, and we need to look down and see that, wow, we have nothing under our feet right now, and that there's this delay between Christian ethics, which in many ways has just blessed and helped just our world in general, not just, you know, the tribe of Christianity, and that our society in general, and many in our society, have just assumed that and are trying to run forward without a Christian worldview, and they're going to look down and they're going to see there's really nothing underneath them. But there's this pause, there's this period of time between when you're running away from Christianity or the Christian worldview, thinking you're making progress, between that and when you actually look down and realize you have nothing under your feet. I thought that's a really good analogy, and just a good picture of kind of where maybe we are, especially kind of in the academic world. So that was good. All right, and I think, you know, that kind of covers chapter 4, right? Doesn't religion hinder morality? So she spends a lot of time really just showing the Christian influence in society in general. As missionaries, we used to talk about there's this cultural lift of Christianity, that when you have a number of people really not just in name becoming Christians, but surrendering their life to Jesus and following Jesus's ethic and the Bible's ethic of caring for the vulnerable, of everyone is created in the image of God, everyone deserves dignity and respect, that God values everybody, and that there is accountability everywhere to that, you know, basic ethic. That when the Christianity has done things like influence the creation of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and it was just really interesting, like seeing her research in terms of like who wrote that declaration, and even like, you know, you had the representative from China wanting to take out all overt references to God, and you've had a couple countries, you know, reject, a couple Arab countries reject, you know, that declaration on grounds of Islamic views. But really, something as basic as universal human rights can't just be assumed. You can't just assume that human beings have dignity. It really depends on your worldview. If it's a materialistic, atheistic worldview, I think she makes the point, like, there's no reason to believe that if primates, if healthy primate, you know, groups have males dominating and, you know, raping females, and that's how their group kind of grows. Where's your foundation that women, you know, have dignity? You have to have something, again, under your feet. And she kind of just fleshes that out in the area of morality and ethics. And so in page 97, this was a quote that I liked. She said, atheist psychologist Steven Pinker uncovers one of the inherent fault lines in this conclusion of the atheist worldview. He points out that if virtue is equated with sacrifice that benefits one own groups in competition with other groups, then fascism would be the ultimate virtuous ideology. In other ways, she quotes the atheistic defense for like atheistic morality, that atheistic morality is the sacrificial virtue that benefits your group in competition with other groups. And so if your group survives, whatever, and so even if the individual must, you know, altruistically sacrifice himself for the survival of your group, that works in kind of the atheistic approach. However, you know, she quotes this psychologist who basically says, but if that's our foundation for morality, then that means that ultimately fascism is good. So I thought that was really good. Any thoughts from chapter 4?
where you were last reading from was actually from chapter 6, just so there's no confusion, but
All right.
the does religion cause violence? I just thought that the overview of it was that that anything taken to the extreme will cause violence. It's up to that person, and it's up to us and how we really look at it, and searching out the truth, not just what's presented as truth, is what we're responsible for.
Yeah, sorry about that. I guess I jumped forward a chapter, but on that chapter 6, I also did really like how she did a little bit of comparative religion and just saying, show me the religion or the non-religion that doesn't have some red on the ledger. And so, you know, Carrie and I have experience in South Asia, and Christianity, Islam, Buddhists, Hindus, you have all these different major religions, some of those major religions coming out of South Asia. And, you know, she even points out that even in Buddhism, right, the peaceful religion, there's acts of atrocity. So the question doesn't Christianity create violence? The question is, extremism creates violence, and particularly done in the name of religion by people who probably aren't really part of that religion. And she kind of makes that point of, look, there's really two reasons why you have moral failure and you have these atrocities. And Jesus talked about them. One is that not everyone who claims Jesus are really followers of Jesus. Not everyone who might be identify as Christian are really Christians. You can identify as Christian and not act according to Jesus's ethic and surrender to Jesus. And the other thing that Jesus pointed out is that you should expect moral failure, and that Christianity is not built upon the perfection of religious leaders, but on the perfection of our one leader, Jesus. And that it should cause us to weep, but it should not be a surprise to see that people will fall and people will fail, and that's just part of being human. Any thoughts on chapter 6? Sorry, we jumped ahead. Thanks, Renee, for catching that. All right, at this point, I want to save time for talking about how just she approaches conversations. But before that, I know there's a lot of chapters that we weren't able to talk about. But if anyone had any particular chapter or part that they thought was helpful or confusing or good, I'll just run through just the chapter titles. And if anyone had any quotes or anything they wanted to share that would be helpful in this book discussion, to share that. So the chapters that we're not able to get into is chapter 6. Is it chapters? How can I take the Bible literally? Is that 6, or did I get that wrong?
Yes, that's chapter 6.
Okay. Can you take the Bible literally, right? She gets into really how to approach the Bible, not this mechanic literalism, but rather you approach it literarily, understanding that God is talking about what's important, and that you can't just come to the text with your own questions and your own assumptions and your own presupposition and your own beliefs about what's important, that you really need to see what the scripture as a whole story says is important. So that was really good. Chapter 7, hasn't science disproved Christianity? And really just goes on this long story of really how Christianity influenced science and in a lot of ways started science, and that science is really built on a foundation of a Christian worldview. Chapter 8, she talks about, doesn't Christianity denigrate women? And, she goes all the way back to Jesus and how Jesus continually just counters misogyny, or even the whole Bible storyline kind of counters, the human and, the male proclivity to exert dominance, and that how the Bible subverts that continually and posits this this vision of equality of manhood and womanhood, that there is diversity within that equality, but there is equality. And chapter 8 talks about chapter 9, isn't Christianity homophobic? She gets into some of her own story of struggle and experience, not just with herself, but other friends from that question. And then chapter 10, doesn't the Bible condone slavery? She does the history of slavery in the Bible, slavery throughout history, even American, Western, And then chapter 11 is on suffering. And then chapter 12 is, what's the last chapter?
How could a loving God send people to hell?
Yeah. So read it yourself if you find those questions interesting. Our discussion already gives you a little bit of a taste of how she deals with these questions, but I just want to open up to you guys. Is there any particular chapter, particular quote, particular question or insight that you got from those other chapters that was helpful for you?
In chapter 9, isn't Christianity homophobic? I found some really good examples when she is talking about her own story, but also about how it's just another sin to have same-sex desires, and that you can, just like any other sin, you can overcome them, and you can still lead what we would consider a typical life of man and woman raising children. And I thought she just handled that in a great way, not with her own story, but with others that she's familiar with. And because she is open about her struggles, that they do seek her out, and she is able to relate to them and help them. And I think it's a great example of being open to our own struggles to other people, so that we can, through our work, through those problems, show other people how we work it out, how we can help them if they come across the same struggle. Just the idea of, you got to be open, you got to let people in so that they know, so that you can help them along the way.
Gary, do you have any thoughts or impressions from some of the other chapters? You're muted.
I listened to this book on a couple long drives, so I'm trying to pull it back out. I found her talk about, doesn't Christianity denigrate women? I don't remember the whole chapter very well, but just going over Jesus' treatment of women just makes you fall in love with Jesus all over again. Because you can't really claim that he is against women in any way. And she does a really good job of women in the Gospels. And how women are just throughout his ministry. So I like that chapter a lot. I'm having trouble pulling any quotes out or anything, but Jesus' valuing of women is unmistakable. In a culture in which women were devalued and often exploited, it underscores their equal status before God and his desire for personal relationship with them. I like that chapter a lot.
And I don't remember if it was in that chapter in particular. I think it might have been. Probably one of the most things that I think was maybe the biggest aha moment for me was she had a section, and it's titled, I forget how it's titled, but it's, it's pretty much against traditional gender roles. And when I first saw that title, I was just like, oh, okay, what are we talking about here? And what she, exposes is that really you have on two ends, right? You have society saying, it's all a construct. Men and women need to be free, and so progressive views on marriage, progressive views on relationships, progressive views on sex. On the other side, you have traditional gender roles, and she, kind of quotes, she goes back to people have this picture in their mind of the husband and wife from Mary Poppins, right? I forget their names, but the wife is like pro women's rights, suffrage movement, women to vote, and the husband is kind of this misogynistic, kind of views her as just his helper to, help him unwind after a long day of work and winning the bread, and kind of this old, the traditional gender role in society. And what she says is that, what she kind of argues is that, look, presented in the scriptures, that marriage and gender roles are not progressive and they're not traditional. It pushes against both. In fact, it's a rehearsal, and it's a picture of God's love for his people, of Christ's love for his church, and that actually to engage in biblical, roles as a husband or a wife, or as a man or as a woman, is part of surrendering to Jesus and wanting to act out this picture of the gospel. And that in marriage, for example, no one side gets the better deal. And so she points out, and I thought it was helpful, that, some Christians have argued, trying to use psychology, that men and women, because we're biologically different, men are more inclined to have this role, women are more inclined to have this role. And really that's being investigated and kind of under attack right now in our culture. And she says it's probably kind of dangerous to try to back up your biblical view of gender role, and especially in marriage, with psychology, because it's really something that we adopt because of our faith in believing that God created us in his image, and God created us different and complementary. And so what results is that each and every one of us have this opportunity, if that we're a follower of Jesus, is to submit to Jesus, is to, for example, me as a husband in Ephesians 5, is to love my wife like Christ loved the church. And that goes against the warm-blooded male impulse of every culture in every society throughout history, to not sacrificially serve one spouse. And for women to submit to your husband, right, is again also counter to, just the impulse, but really to step into that is to step into a willingness to play out the gospel. And she makes this point that it's not that God made marriage and then he said, oh, I could use that as a metaphor and an illustration of the gospel, but rather it's the other way around. That God created man in his own image, and it wasn't good that he was alone. and that God was always a relational God, and that marriage and man and woman itself is a picture that God created to help show off God's relationship with his people and what God is inviting people into. So I thought that was really good and really powerful. I know me personally, I kind of feel that my faith in Jesus, that the whole husband and wife and roles in marriage, that kind of thing, so often gets tangled up with these assumptions about traditional roles, and that really that this is a challenge to re-examine it in all of life, and to submit to and to pursue this enactment and this play of playing out the gospel with my wife. So I thought that was kind of like probably the biggest aha moment for me, probably the most helpful part of the book.
Just so if anybody's following along, what the part that you're talking about is in this copy of the book, at least, it's on page 142, and it's no mandate for traditional gender roles. And on that note, I do have to go, but thank you.
Thank you, Carrie, for joining us today.
See you, Carrie. All right, so we're going to wrap up with the last part, and we're going to get into a discussion about, so, this is a great book. That, I loved it, but each and every one of us have different relationships, and especially we have conversations with non-believing friends and family and people all the time. And I am not spooky smart like Rebecca Mclaughlin. I am, and I do not have, fireside chats with, lots of professors in Cambridge or MIT. But I do have a number of relationships and conversations with people who are far from God, who wouldn't identify as Christian, or, really aren't surrendered, maybe Christian in name, but aren't surrendered to Jesus and the biblical worldview. So I'd like to spend a little bit of time in just discussing with you, Renee, is, what does it actually look like to have these conversations, and what can we learn from Rebecca, the author, about how we can do this better? Do you have any thoughts, just to get us started, Renee, on kind of what we can learn from this book and that?
Yes, and Joni, feel free to jump in at any time, but my thoughts on this were really about how she's showing us where she's at with those smart people, with those professors, with those fireside chats, where she's at and what she's had to learn in order to have those conversations. But what about the conversations we're going to have with the people that we are in constant contact with? If you work in a factory and you have a lot of different people coming your way, what kind of conversations are they bringing up? What are some of their struggles? Those are the things that you need, or we really should be digging deeper at, so that we can have those honest conversations with them and be able to be on their level, on our own level, to still guide them to Christ. It's very important, and I don't think enough of us really take the time to think about those conversations beforehand, to prepare for those conversations beforehand, that we know will come our way.
Joni, if you are there, I'm not sure if you are, were there any insights that you got and encouragement from this book on just how to be having conversations with friends or family or people who are not believers?
Yeah, I think I just found encouragement that no matter who we're talking to, it's an opportunity that God has placed before us. And so we have to be ready and prepared. And I think she did a really great job of making me think about some things differently. It's definitely a book I think I need to maybe reread, which I don't do often. Because I think we sometimes in the busyness of life forget to stop and think who we're talking to is a person. And we do need to understand what's going on in their life so that we can show how God could work his way into that situation. Not even sometimes to make it better, but just to give you a better peace of mind as you're going through it.
Sorry, I lost some audio there for a second, but I got it back. Yeah. So I spent some time thinking about basically how does she approach, and how does she approach trying to persuade her friends and the people that she knows in this book. And so here's a couple, I think, bullet points or maybe approaches that I see here, and maybe we can talk a little bit about that. So the first thing I noticed, really I see three things. The first thing I noticed is that she's really quick to admit and to acknowledge any truth behind the objection that she's faced. So I found it refreshing that she would spend time to acknowledge that sometimes behind a lot of these objections that there is some relevant concerns, right? I mean, slavery in the United States. She goes through example after example of there are areas that we need to admit that, hey, absolutely, there's some truth to what you say, and also personally to repent and to acknowledge that, hey, each and every one of us, I fail to live according to the Christian ethic, and I am open and willing to be confronted even by someone who doesn't share my faith, that I'm inconsistent, and that I get to model with the people I'm having conversations with what repentance and trust looks like. That it's not me living perfectly and being that, Ned Flanders kind of neighbor that is impeccable, but it's someone who constantly turns to the one and only person who was perfect, to Jesus, and to continually find, forgiveness and help through trusting in him. So that first point of just, I think she does a great job of not taking these objections as an attack and immediately attacking back, but really sifting through, hey, there is a needle of truth in what's rubbing you wrong about Christianity. And she's very quick to recognize that, and even some of the deeper problems that are really painful to think about or talk about, she gets into that. So that's the first thing, is this really just to recognize that sometimes there's truth behind objections. Renee, did you have anything you wanted to say about that? I see your mouth.
One quote from her that really struck me is she was talking about talking to an atheist, and it said, "But I would not dream of telling them that Christianity and atheism are two paths to the same truth. When they say they do not trust in Jesus, I respect them enough to believe them." And I think that's a very important thing, is that we often say, no, you don't understand, but we need to respect them enough to believe they are where they say they are, and to stop and look at, like, what is it that I could tell them that would help them where they are, not just going, no, you're wrong. I thought that was a very important point from her.
Yeah, and that's the second. So the first part is like she'll just recognize the truth behind the argument, but then the next part she'll do is she'll explain, her conviction based on faith in Christ, based on the biblical worldview or Christian ethics. And conversely, she doesn't hold her non-believing friends to that standard. So just like you said, Renee, like respect someone who doesn't share your faith enough means that you do not condemn them for not holding your beliefs or your convictions or your ethics, right? And so I think that in the US especially, we sometimes get that backwards, that we're quick to condemn, whether it's same-sex marriage, whether it's gender identity, whether it's, you go through the list and we're quick to say, you know, this is the truth and you're wrong and you're bad or evil for believing it, to really just saying, look, if you don't believe the gospel and if you don't believe the Bible, why would you believe those things? I believe those things because of the gospel. So instead of attacking people for believing on Christians, you share the gospel with those people. So that's kind of the first point. So like, yeah, admit that there's truth behind the objection, explain your conviction based on the gospel, and don't hold them to a Christian standard if they're not Christians. And then I think the third thing that she does is that she marvels and she is shocked when non-believers and non-believer friends she's talking to, she's shocked when they share any part of the Christian worldview or ethics, right? So it's like, you don't believe in Jesus, but you believe in universal human rights. That is great. I believe that too. I believe it based on that I trust in Jesus, and God has given everybody, everyone's created in the image of God, and everyone has equal dignity and worth. So you just like, you celebrate when it's like anything that someone believes or does is consistent with biblical ethics or biblical worldview, but then you press in and challenge them on that. Is you challenge them as like, well, I believe in human rights because of my faith in Jesus and because of my faith in Christianity. How can you get to that without considering the gospel, without considering the truth of Christianity? And so her approach is to, again, first of all, admit, you know, any sin, admit any truth that's in people's objections, explain your convictions from the gospel. Don't expect people who aren't believers to act like believers or to believe like believers. But when you do see people who aren't believers act inconsistently with their worldview, that they believe that human beings are valuable, that they believe in justice, that they believe in equality, that they believe in, you know, human rights, that they believe in, you fill in the blank, celebrate with them, marvel with them, and ask them, how do you actually get there? Because I know how I get there from the gospel. And maybe you should consider, you know, the good news. You should consider the gospel. So I kind of saw that as just kind of broadly how she approaches these kinds of intellectual conversations, but really focused on trying to win, you know, the heart of people, not win the argument, to win over the mind, and not just, get some notches on the belt in terms of a public debate or of who had the best comeback. What do you guys think? I mean, that's kind of just my big takeaway of just how she approaches this thing.
I agree wholeheartedly that to me, that was the biggest learning experience through her book, was just how to approach other people. And yes, she gave us 12 topics to approach the people that we come across on a daily basis, but it's the loving way that we need to be addressing them, instead of sometimes we come up with this kind of in your face mentality, and are we going to change anybody and their beliefs against Christianity if we're right back in their face? We stick to our truths pretty strongly in that format, but if we say, like you had said, you know what, I believe that too, and how did you get there? What was your story? What is your story like? So getting deeper in with them, instead of kind of what our whole purpose of a church is reaching wider and going deeper. And we need to go deeper with not just our faith within ourselves, but we need to go deeper with the people that are in our lives and find out how they are where they are, how they got where they are, and what we can do to guide them along the way.
Any thoughts from you, Joni, if you're still with us? Okay.
Not really. I just think that it was a really good book that I think would lend to open conversations with others. And that's what it's all about, is relationships.
Amen. Amen. All right. I'd like to close with one final quote from the book. She says, "Friend, if you are settling for deferred beliefs, hoping that somehow the universe has a plan, believing in human equality is self-evident, but not knowing why, wondering if anyone who knew your secret thoughts could ever truly love you, come to Jesus. Come to the man who brought hope to oppressed slaves. Come to the man who calls the dead people from their graves. Come to the man who found my friend Rachel in the library at Yale when she realized how little she deserved mercy and how much Jesus loved her. And her heart swelled with thankfulness as she surrendered herself to him. I am the resurrection and the life," Jesus said to Martha. And he says the same to you. "Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this?" So, highly recommend Confronting Christianity. Again, 12 chapters really stand on their own. So you could really just pick the chapter that you really want to dive in the most on. And next month, we'll be having another discussion on a book by Wayne Grudem, Christian Beliefs. Oh, is this backwards? This looks backwards.
No, you're right. You're
Okay,
correct.
good. All right, looks backwards to me. So, Christian Beliefs by Wayne Grudem. Renee, do you have anything you want to say about this book? And as we look forward to people who want to read it with us and discuss it as well.
Yes, I'm very excited to be introducing our first theology book to the series. And it is a great, no matter how much theology you have, it's a great starting point. It's a great way to reach out to others and really dig into what their beliefs are. Please give me the full title. It's 20 beliefs, right?
Yes. So 20 basics every Christian should know.
Yeah. And it's just a really great way to strengthen your own theology and reach out to others. And it is going to be led by Pastor Blair. And most importantly, it is going to be our first effort to have both a group here at the church as well as on the online. So I'm looking forward to that. And I just hope that many more can join us during that time.
Yep. I do want to apologize for some of you who came in person, not knowing that it was going to be online Zoom. But as the tech helper here, I'll make sure that we'll have a venue next time where we'll have in-person discussion and also the ability for people to tune in online as well. So I want to thank you, Renee, Joni, for participating in this. I just really appreciate you two very much. Also for those who were here before, my wife, Carrie, and Eli, and many other of you who have been reading this book and kind of the side conversations we've been having about it. Again, personally, just been really, really helped by it. And I'm really looking forward to seeing Dr. Rebecca Mclaughlin and just the ministry that she'll continue to do. And again, I'm just praying that God will raise up more Christian apologists who kind of take her approach and are evidently having gospel conversations with their non-believing friends in a way that's winsome and loving, and moving away from kind of this us versus them and winning the argument sort of thing. So Just really, really appreciate it, and I appreciate you all. Thanks for joining me on this book discussion on Confronting Christianity.